true stories
that make us say,
wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
We were at the top of a wave and our boat tipped over. The last we saw our boat, it was upside down, floating away from us.
I had my left leg forward and it smashed down on the surfboard and it shattered.
What does it look like for a coral biologist to minister to creation, to honor their creator, when corals, the animals they're there to serve and protect, no longer exist?
Hi, I'm Rob Vischer. When it comes to the ocean, my knowledge base is pretty shallow. Like most of humanity, when I visit the beach, I swim in it, walk beside it, and maybe even take home some seashells. The sheer size and power of the ocean definitely make me say, wow, God, but I've never really felt comfortable diving deep into its depths. Rachel G. Jordan isn't like me, or most of humanity. She's a marine biologist and a storyteller with scuba gear, a love for God, and fascination with coral reefs.
My name is Rachel Jordan. I am a coral scientist. I study these amazing underwater creatures that are in trouble. Corals around the world are rapidly declining because the environment of the ocean is changing faster than corals can keep up with. We're also seeing extreme increases in coral diseases. While I was coral biologist, I was getting to scuba dive and drive boats and work with a team of field scientists to try to combat this disease. We were going on intervention dives to apply a special antibiotic medicine to the disease lesions of these corals. As I was watching the medicine not particularly help and the corals that I had loved for years prior die, I started to think really intensely about restoration. What does it look like for a coral biologist to minister to creation, to honor their creator, when corals, the animals they're there to serve and protect, no longer exist? And I started thinking a whole lot about how from Genesis all the way through to Revelation, we see this story of Jesus's redemptive process. Back in the Garden of Eden, we see it trickling through the Bible all the way through to the end of everything. And the Bible ends with this beautiful encapsulation of God recreating his creation. So much of the harm, the destruction that I see as a marine scientist, I have hope that these corals will someday exist in a different, holier, heavenly capacity. That just as I may be the one to metaphorically hold the corals as they leave the world, Jesus holds them as he'll bring them into the one that he is actively creating.
Rachel found beauty in the ocean by suiting up in scuba gear and taking care of sick coral reefs. In our next story, Joseph finds beauty in the ocean by grabbing his surfboard and riding some sick waves.
My name is Joseph Deskins. I live here in San Diego, California. And I hurt myself in 1998. I was surfing professionally at that time, and I took a trip to Mexico, into a fairly famous spot down in Mexico called Boca de Pascuales. It's in Colima, Mexico, about 1,300 miles from the San Diego-Tijuana border. And so I flew down there. I was surfing one morning. I was out surfing. I was all by myself. And I was waiting to catch a good wave. I caught a good wave to get barreled. The object is to get barreled and to come out of the barrel. For those of you who are familiar with surfing, barrel is where the wave tubes and we get inside the tube. And that's kind of the most exciting part of surfing. And then especially when we come out. And so I had found a peak this morning all by myself, and I was looking for a wave going left. So I was doing exactly that. And so the goal was to line up on the peak, take off slightly behind the peak. That way you can take off straight into the barrel, get barreled, and hopefully come out at the end. And so I was doing that. I caught a peak, I took off behind the peak, perfect position. I pulled in the barrel. I was in the barrel. And I was going, this is a really nice barrel. And then I go, this is a really nice barrel. And then I'm thinking, boy, this is the best barrel I've gotten all day. And then stopped seeing the lip come over me. And then the thought went through my head, I made it. And as soon as that thought went through my head, boom, the lip came down and smashed me on the surfboard. I had my left leg forward and it smashed down on the surfboard and it shattered. So it shattered long ways into 5 pieces. So if you can imagine your bones shattering like a stick, like a baseball bat, maybe shattering long ways into 5 pieces. And also I blew out my knee at the same time, my left leg. And so when that happened, I was obviously in the white water. When I was in the white water, my left foot was hitting me in the back of the head. Boom, 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 boom. You can imagine that. So originally I couldn't even feel my leg. And I had to put both my hands on it and I touched it and I go, okay, my leg is still there. I just can't feel it. And I was laying on my surfboard. And then eventually I drifted in on the beach. Leg was helicoptering. And then this big Mexican guy came down. He undid my leash off my surfboard to my ankle and picked me up, carried me up the beach, sat me on a chair. And some of my friends came and visited me until the ambulance came, took me off to the hospital, Mexican hospital. I had quite an interesting stay. The guy fell asleep. I was in there screaming for hours in the middle of the night, and nobody came to help me. Finally, about 5 o'clock in the morning, I screamed, and the guy came. It looked like he just woke up. It came and helped me out. So they did not take very good care of me in the Mexican hospital. A plane from the U.S. came and landed at the airport at 8 a.m. when it opened, and they had me on an ambulance there, so I would get there about the same time as the plane, 8 o'clock in the morning, and get me back to the United States of America. The last thing I remember is being taken out of the plane. I passed out. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital. They had already operated on me. The doctor said that I was an hour away from either dying or losing my leg. So they fixed it. I got a rod, a plate, 9 screws, and 3 wires. Put my leg back together, and they are still in there to this day. This whole event happened in 1998. And so I rehabbed for a year. So my bone came together pretty good, but my knee did not do well. After 1 year of rehab, my knee did not work properly. I did not walk correctly. Running was like kind of the skip hobble thing. And basically it was not working right. And so after 1 year of rehab, the doctor said, okay, what you got is what you get. You're just going to have to live with it. So I said, okay, I guess so. And then a week later, we had an evangelist come to our church, Randy Clark, and he came to our church. He preached, he prayed for people. And at the very, very end, as almost an afterthought, he goes, there's somebody here with A, B, and C wrong with their leg. God wants to heal you right now. Let me pray for you. And I said, that's me, sitting in the front row. And he came over, he kneeled down, and he prayed for like 10 minutes, which is a really long time. He got up and he said, we're done. And my leg was perfectly fine, and it's been perfectly fine ever since. It works the same as the other leg.
For Joseph, God showed his healing power through an evangelist, which is miraculous, but a little more traditional. For Rachel G. Jordan, God spoke to her through Porky. I'll let her explain.
As a marine biologist, I've had some very cool opportunities to scuba dive in really special places. There was a particular site that I dove on for my job many, many times. It was a shipwreck site called the Windjammer, and it was just this really pretty little underwater wreck from several hundred years ago that had been completely encrusted over by these giant Montastria cavernosa corals, these very large mountainous corals. Think like the size of a coffee table, just brightly colored animals just stuck on the sides of the shipwreck. Very jewel-like, very colorful, and then lots of movement of fish swirling around the corals, algae waving in the currents, sea fan thickets, brightly purple, kind of sparkling in the backdrop. It was an incredibly beautiful reefscape. And as I was diving on the Windjammer, collecting scientific data for my job, I would encounter these really peculiar creatures, many of which I believe taught me something about the character of God. And one of my favorite creatures at the Windjammer, I like to call him Porky. He was this little porcupine fish, very plump, kind of with a puckered face, and he would swim out of his little cave and greet me and say hello. And when I think about Porky, the porcupine fish, I think a lot about what does Porky teach me about the character of God. It reminds me of God's desire for intimacy with us, of his curiosity and desire to participate in our lives, to have us invite him in to our thoughts and our day-to-day, and how he wants to be along for the ride. He wants to be present. Think about how Porky would follow me along on my underwater dives. It was just fun having him there. It was a very special time getting to hang out with that sweet fish.
As a marine biologist, Rachel loves spending her time beneath the waves. But for Will and his friends, beneath the waves was not a place they were hoping to go.
One of the guys that I was stationed with and deployed with reached out to me to compete in a race. In this race, you row a boat 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean. It's a 28-foot long carbon fiber boat designed for ocean rowing. We were a team of 4, and it takes between 40 and 50-ish days. So the race started December 12th of 2022. The first week, really, really tough. We pushed into the second week, and the morning of the 28th, we were at the top of a wave and our boat tipped over. These boats are designed to right themselves in case they do flip back over. And for whatever reason, our boat did not flip back over. First thing that went through my mind was to get the life raft out and deploy the life raft. We ended up having to cut one of the lines to drop the life raft down. But at some point in time, the knife that we had used to cut the life raft away from our boat actually punctured a hole in our life raft. So we're all in the life raft. The last we saw our boat, it was upside down, floating away from us. It's about 4:15-ish in the morning, pitch black, and we're stuck in a life raft and we're still in 30-foot swells. So each one of our harnesses had an emergency beacon on it. And so as soon as we're in the life raft, we are activating our emergency beacons. The way the beacons work, it sends a signal to the United States because we're Americans, and the Coast Guard takes that signal and then pushes it out to a Marine center that can coordinate a rescue. The race coordinators had told us within 18 hours of an activation, somebody should have contacted you, or, there should be some type of rescue initiated. We assumed that our beacons had gone through and the coordination of the rescue was being worked out. But what we know now is the beacon signals were essentially, there had been several accidental activations earlier in the past couple days. And what we know now is the beacons were just kind of shoved under the rug and assumed they were accidental activation. So we assumed that we had about 18 hours, but little did we know, nobody actually knew that we had capsized. Our only means of communication is a VHF radio now. Well, VHF radio is essentially line of sight. And when you're sitting 2 feet off the water in 30-foot waves, your line of sight is not very far. And so we only had one battery for our VHF radio. And so we eventually started a system where every 30 minutes we would turn the radio on, make a mayday call, and then at the same time we would inflate the life raft because we had a hole in it. A couple hours in, the sun started to come up and it starts getting warm. And so you start shedding layers. And then it started to get later in the afternoon, and the sun started going down. And that's when it started getting really hard because no response on the Mayday call, no response on the beacons, and it's starting to get dark. And that's when you start thinking, all right, we got to make it through this next night. And how are you going to do that? We prayed a lot. I mean, you start thinking about how are we going to make it through the night? The life raft is deflating. I mean, there's definitely sharks out there, like 4 guys linked arms together, just bobbing around in the ocean. I mean, you're not going to last very long without a life raft even. So we started singing some church songs. One particular, Our God is a Awesome God. I mean, that we sang that a whole bunch, and the sun had set, and we did one of our Mayday calls, and we hear some static on the radio, and we hadn't gotten any response all day long, and so we were super excited about just hearing static, and then did the Mayday call again, and this time we heard like a garbled response. I said on the radio, I don't understand you guys, but if you can hear me, click the mic twice, and we hear a click, click. So now we know that they can hear us even though we can't hear them. And so pulled out the GPS, sent a grid coordinate, so at least they know where we're at. Waited another 30 minutes, and eventually we could communicate with, it ended up being a ship, a 600-foot cargo ship that was receiving our transmission. And we later found that they were about 15 miles away when they heard our very first transmission. And I mean, we're still in 20-foot swells. And so I firmly believe that there were angels out there deflecting our signal to send our radio signal to that ship. There's absolutely no other explanation for that. So we start to communicate with them, and they eventually get to, 6-7 miles away, and now we can actually communicate. And it took about 2 to 3 hours, I think, for them to finally get close enough where we could hear them laying on their foghorn. And so we unzipped the life raft and we poked our head out, and we could see this great big ship lit up on the horizon. And I looked at the guys and I said, "It's a big ship." I mean, we had no idea if it was going to be a sailboat, if it was, a fishing vessel. And like I said, it was a 600-foot cargo ship that just happened to hear our distress signal. And they eventually got up right next to us. They threw us a line. We pulled up next to the ship, and they threw over a wooden rung rope ladder. And again, we're still in 20-foot swells, and it's about 9 o'clock at night now, and we got to climb up the side of this ship. We figured it was up 20 to 25 feet. We had to climb up the side with the ship rocking back and forth and the waves slamming into the life raft. And we eventually, all 4 of us, get onto the ship. Come to find out, the ship, it was one of the very few ships that was traveling from South Africa to Montreal. So moving south to north through the Atlantic. And they had been, come to find out, they had been delayed a day at their last port, which put them within 15 miles of us. Otherwise, they would have been, if they weren't delayed, they would have been 200 miles away. But it just goes to show how God was working even days before we even started the race. God had delayed that ship, so it was at the right spot at the right time. Like, the number of miracles that God did that day, like, absolutely unbelievable.
When Will thought he might die in the ocean, he and his friends sang Awesome God. And even though they didn't know it, God had planned their rescue. Will learned about resting in God through his boat capsizing. Rachel G. Jordan learned the same lesson from a Goliath grouper.
Another animal story from the Windjammer shipwreck was that there was this giant Goliath grouper. When I think about the Goliath grouper, and I ask, what does this creature teach me about the character of God? I think about the strength and the sort of ability to have power held at bay that this grouper demonstrated. The way that this particular grouper would rest in the shadow of the windjammer and just sort of watch the world, it reminds me of God's presence, how he oversees everything, and he is incredibly large and powerful, but he is present and purposeful and doesn't necessarily have to be constantly moving or hurrying. There are times where he even encourages us to be at rest. If the creatures of the underwater world can proclaim God's character to me and the rest of creation, so then can I. By doing what God has made me to do, by honoring him with my life and being the person that he's called me to be, I can display God's character through being his creation as well.
If you want to hear more stories about the ocean, go to rachelgjordan.com and pick up Rachel's book, If the Ocean Has a Soul, a marine biologist's pursuit of truth through deep waters of faith and science. In this episode, God healed a surfer's knee, planned a rescue for a team of rowers crossing the Atlantic, and taught a marine biologist about his character through coral reefs and 2 well-placed fish. All of these stories remind me of Psalm 139:9. If I dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. The sheer size of the ocean and the creation that lives beneath the waves make me want to say, wow, God. But what makes me want to tear up and maybe cry as I say it is that God would know right where I am and love me even if I was somewhere out in the waves. When I say, wow, God, I mean the one true living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the one who makes my heart say,
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
My wow God story.
I wanted to share a wow God moment.
That's my wow God story. Praise God.
And I'm so thankful to God for this wow God moment.
So, thank you, God.